Good evening, friends. Thank you, Satya, for joining from Canada. Good morning, very good morning to you. Kapil, very good evening to you from Bombay. Dr. Ramkumar, very good evening to you from Hyderabad, and me from Mumbai. Good evening, friends. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the India Power Talk. As announced during the first India Power Talk this year, we have a new topical focus, India of the Future. The series features global thought leaders and innovators who can provide actionable insights into the potential developments that could shape India of tomorrow. We'll also be looking at the trends shaping the entire world and what that means for India, with a special focus on key areas like science, entrepreneurship, policymaking, education, and new technologies. I am pleased to mention that India of the Future series is being organized in association with the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana State Chapter in India, with the active support from Dr. Ramkumar, who is my co-host and the president of the chapter. And I'm looking forward for the many brilliant guests we will be welcoming in the coming months and to hearing their thoughts on how we can realize this country's great potential. I think this focus on India of the future is now more relevant than ever. As the world emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, with the terrible loss of life and the economic hardships it has brought, we need to take on what most scientists agree is the greatest threat facing humankind and the well-being of our planet, the climate change. And as a country in the global south, India is already feeling the impact of climate change. Effects we can expect to grow more severe. Retreat of glaciers in the Himalayas due to warming threatens to drastically increase the flow rates of major rivers, including the Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Yamuna. At the same time, effects of rising temperature could cause the Indus River to run dry, according to the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Heat waves are becoming more frequent and severe, while experts expect growing numbers of landslides and floods in states such as Assam. If current trends continue, India can expect to see massive internal migration also. In addition, our irresponsible attitude is now destroying a whole world of living organisms and our own home. Our energy production, product consumption, and careless waste management contribute directly to climate change, resulting in warmer air, creating a disastrous greenhouse effect. Adding to these dire developments are warnings from the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research that climate-related factors could cause India's GDP to decline by up to 9% if current trends are not reversed. Changes in growing seasons of major crops like rice, whose production could fall by 40%, represent one contributing factor to this GDP decline. A further grave concern is waste, the vast majority of which is disposed in the form of landfill. We'll come to that little later. These are just few examples of current and projected developments. I realize they paint a bleak picture indeed, yet I would also like to emphasize that becoming resigned to these outcomes would be our worst enemy. Inaction is not an option, although there is no denying that effects of climate change can already be seen and felt all over the world. Scientists and technological innovators point to a wide array of measures that can be implemented now and in the near future to cut down greenhouse gas emissions and enable us to change course. There will be no single silver bullet to combat these threats and avert catastrophe. And this is one reason why significant progress in mastering climate change will be possible only with the full commitment of international bodies, policymakers, and major corporations, as well as innovative startups and small to medium-sized enterprises with innovative technologies. In fact, we need to raise awareness and support across all stakeholders in societies worldwide. In the light of this urgency and complexity, the challenges we face, it is my great pleasure and privilege and honor to welcome our guests who are knowledge leaders on the topic. Head of the Center of Excellence on Human-Centered Digital Economy at the Digital Economist, Satya Brata. So welcome to the talk today. National President of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, IACC, Mr. Kapil Kaul. Thank you, sir. And my co-host and panelist, Dr. Ramkumar Rudrabhatla, who is President of the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana Chapter of IACC. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today. Let me open the discussion with Satya Das. Mr. Satya grew up in Canada, where he has published numerous books and articles and advised government on strategy and policy decisions. He is now with the Digital Economist, a global impact organization whose founder and CEO Navrup Sahdev appeared with me on India Power Talk last year. You will find her interview on our website as well. Mr. Satya, could you introduce briefly yourself and offer your opening remarks on the topic of not climate change, but climate control?
Well, you see, Nitin, I've actually been a journalist in the 20th century for a quarter century of that, last quarter. And in this century, I've been a policy advisor, strategist, and an author. But, when it comes to the climate crisis, I would dispute the word control. Because you see, this is part of the human arrogance, to think that we can control nature. We cannot. So the real phrase we're looking for, I believe, is climate resilience. We know that catastrophic climate change is upon us. So adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, and all of that has to be backed by what we need as the energy transition. What form is the energy transition going to take? Yes, decarbonization, but you see, it has to come from a framework of all of the above. One cannot simply say that we'll go this path and ignore that path. I mean, in India, you have the situation of one gentleman who has made his fortune in coal, who's simultaneously investing crores in renewable energy. This is not a contradiction. This is part of the energy transition. But when I talk about climate resilience, you see, at the Digital Economist, we've developed what we call a 6D vision for approaching climate. So first 3 Ds are disarmament, dignity, and development. What do we mean by that? By disarmament, we're not saying get rid of the military. We're saying shift the resources away from new research and production on weapons and use the military for civil defense. Use the soldiers, the military engineers, the electronics and electric engineers to actually build the hard infrastructure of climate change that'll be needed for resilience. In my native place of Odisha, we have seen how a well-organized government response has actually averted widespread loss of life in recent cyclonic storms. I mean, when one goes back to 30 years ago and devastation cyclones used to bring to Odisha, and now you look at the changes and how few people are actually disrupted, you see, that's what we need. I mean, at the village level, at the ground level, India has an amazing capacity to involve local people, involve local communities in building their own resilience. And, there are many, many promising things ahead despite the bleak picture you painted, because first of all, the great majority of Indians were born after economic liberalization, which dates all of us in terms of our lives. And a third of Indians actually live in the global north, even though they're physically present in India. So with those sort of foundations, I think that India actually, if it marshals its resources, if it convenes itself as a leader in climate change and shows the world what Indian talent and genius can do, which is evident in every sphere of endeavor all across the planet, then you have a bright future ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Satya, for this brief introduction. May I now request my co-host, Dr. Ramkumar, who is not just the president of Indo-American Chamber, Andhra and Telangana chapter, but is a former consultant to the World Bank projects and an MD of PP Next Gen Tech. I would request Dr. Ramkumar to introduce our Mr. Kapil Kumar and seek his views.
Yeah, thank you, Nitin. And it's a privilege to be a part of this discussion with such eminent and really passionate speakers on climate change / control. Now, I think it was a very good introduction, and it's very interesting to note the distinction between control, change, and resilience, as Satya has put it. Now, let's add another dimension to it. The perception of advanced countries to climate change and the perception of countries, emerging countries like India, China, and a few other countries, there seems to be a gap in the very definition of this particular issue which is confronting the world. It confronts all of us. But here, when we talk in India, a leader who is duly a representative of the government, he understands the word climate. I mean, he understands the word pollution control. I believe that pollution is a part of climate. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the climate is being affected. So when we are talking about pollution control, of course, all the 5 natural elements, are getting contaminated. So, where do we begin? Where does this all begin? I feel that it's not just the policy which matters, but even at the micro level, each one of us, I think, will have to really apply ourselves to that. And very interestingly, the Government of India has recently the Swachh Bharat campaign. It is just not a campaign of cleanliness. It is far deeper than merely calling it a campaign of cleanliness. I think it's the first time, and the Government of India thought it appropriate to look at to look at a whole range of things like alternate energy, green energy, Swachh Bharat campaign, and look at alternate means of fuel. I think a lot is happening, on the government's perception of the need for climate change. But we as citizens and members of the community, I think we have a role to play. And I think none other than the most passionate person on climate change is our Mr. Kapil Kaul, who happens to be also the leader of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and the president of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, our national president. And here I'd like to introduce him. And when he mentioned to me that when I told him that, he's got to come and participate in this seminar, he just jumped with joy. He says, I'll have an opportunity to share my passion with each one of you. And I don't want to come between you and Mr. Kapil Kaul. And here you go, Kapil.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Nitin. Satya, I think it's a meeting of. I'm so happy to be here today. Not just because of environment, but there's a meeting of minds. You talk about 6D, I talk about 3E or E3, right? And E follows D, and I've tried to compress it down to 3. But more importantly, you're from Odisha, and so am I. I was born in Cuttack, all right? And our family has been based in Odisha for over 3.5 centuries, right? So that's right. And our ancestral place is in Chandni Chowk. And we had our zamindaris in what is known as Darpani estates. So that, and second is, I'm so happy that you have mentioned the way we have handled the crisis of that cyclone in Odisha. Yes, it was something that I also marked, that only I think 1 or 2 lives were lost or they were maimed, which is amazing, And I think that's where the hope comes in. And that's what I was saying even in Nasik yesterday, that climate change is inevitable. It's there. In fact, it's already on. The question is whether it's 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. That's not the issue. It's happening. That's one. Second, acknowledgement is important. Third, that what is important is that we have the most important thing. We have quantum computing power today to take care of the calculations and the kind of the R&D that we need on that. The third thing which I'm so happy about is that I've also been saying that defense is very important, not just for warfare, not just for fighting man against man. But I have coined a phrase which I used when I was interviewed with BBC during the visit of Catherine Tai, the trade czar from the US. And they asked me about that what are the relations with China, now that India and US have come very close together. So I actually believed in what I said, and this is a phrase which I coined, that in defense of nature, it must be said that man has to be defended against himself, as he is his own greatest enemy. All right?
Absolutely.
And interestingly, it's only the ants in the living kingdom and man that fights against each other. All right? So, and it's defense technologies that actually play a very vital role in all civilian life, even the internet. It's a DARPA that came up with the internet, and it's come for free. And this is not just one example, there are umpteen number of examples. All your satellites, all those technologies are defense funded, right? But they're used for terraformer calculations, etc. So you're absolutely bang on that defense expenditure, defense has to be used for addressing climate issues, right? So I think it's fantastic. And regarding the waste that you're talking about, Nitin, definitely we are wasting. Our consumerism is a waste. And what I'm saying about E3 is that we must conserve energy, we must conserve the ecology, we must conserve the environment. Conservation is the most important thing. And what we must eliminate is 3 C's, and which is eliminate crude oil from this planet. When crude oil was not there, we didn't have any of the derivatives, no plastics, no byproducts, nothing, right? And we must eliminate consumerism the way it is right now. And we must eliminate corruption to whatever extent we can. It's a fact of life, though. So with this, Nitin, thank you.
Well, and if I can jump in, Nitin, excuse me, you know, Kapil, between the C's and the E's, when my D's are sandwiched, I spoke about the first 3 Ds, which are, you know, disarmament, dignity, and development. But the next 3 Ds tie what you're talking about, computing, because those are the foundation for digitalization,
yes,
which is the application of emerging technology.
Correct.
Decentralization, which means that everything has to be at the local level, at the panchayat level, at the BDO level. It can be a national policy, but it has to be enacted in a decentralized way. And then all of that lays the foundation for decarbonization, which is what you bring up when you're talking about banishing crude oil. So between the 3 C's that we must avoid, the 6 D's are part of the solution, and your 3 E's are the outcome we all want to achieve.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now let me pick up the last D which you mentioned and take it forward. Now there are many different models, as we know, for the carbon tax on CO2 emissions, some of which are already in place. But Mr. Satya, you have co-authored a paper, I know for a fact, proposing a global carbon levy on fossil resources at the point of extraction. Now, such a levy could incentivize the shift towards renewables by making fossil fuels more costly. At the same time, it could generate revenue. Now, how exactly, my request to you would be, how exactly could India benefit from it? Your remarks on this.
Okay, let me just preface that, Nitin, by pointing out that almost all carbon taxation is aimed at the consumer. What is the consumer to do? I mean, you're living in a world, in an economy where, in fact, everything that you're doing is based on fossil fuels. Why are you penalized for the reality of the world? On the other hand, you have Saudi Arabia, you have entire Gulf, you have all these massive oil producers. They're selling recklessly. We in other countries are paying to protect them. We're paying to protect the sea lanes and the oil transport. And what are the Saudis paying? You know, they're not even solving refugee crises in the region. So when you see situations like that, then you come to the realization that if instead of a minimum floor tax on consumption, as has been proposed by International Monetary Fund, that the IMF turned its attention to global carbon levy that could benefit India greatly. A modest production tax would in fact exceed the Paris Agreement target of $100 billion per year to fund inclusive climate resilience across the world. In fact, by our calculations, a tax that would work out to no more than 50 or 60 cents per barrel of oil would raise more than $250 billion annually. Now, getting the Saudis to pay that, of course, is another issue. But once one puts the prospect on the table, then one can build some resonance. And you see, in India itself, India has the brain power, it has the human resources, it has the talent, and most of all, it has the problem. I mean, extreme weather is all over the world, but as you rightly pointed out, Nitin, in your beginning comments, the shifts in India that are threatening agriculture, that are threatening population. I mean, there are very few arable places in India that people can finish to. So we're going to have to look at controlled environment agriculture, which may be fruit and vegetable crops, anything that's not a tree, that's grown indoors, to make more efficient use. Because you see, all of these advanced aeroponic systems, which is even better than hydroponic because you use much less water and have greater canopy yield, can be built in the most remote areas. You could actually have fresh vegetables growing in the Rajasthan desert if it's done indoors. And how is it going to be powered? Rajasthan desert, use photovoltaic energy, use aeolian energy, which is solar and wind. So you see, all of these things come together in a concoction that becomes a climate positive and a climate negative. International Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, which is the biggest tech grouping in the world, has come up with a phrase that it calls strong sustainability. So it's not just enough to strive for sustainability, it's how can we maintain sustainability and maintain the momentum. And India, like it or not, with more than a fifth of the global population, is going to be the proving ground. Unlike China, India is well plugged into international community. You have English language, you have all the connections you need, you have the population, and you have the problem. So it's not just a matter of India having benefit, it's a matter of India taking leadership. Absolutely. I must say, and I'd love to hear from fellow panelists on their perspectives on this.
Okay. Kapil, you want to add on this?
Yeah. I fully agree with Satya that we, in terms of aeroponics and use of technology for growing, and we're having overpopulation, land mass issues, cultivable area, and impact of climate issues. But somehow I suspect that the world, by and large, and India in particular, only works on shock therapy. All right, whether you like it or not, right? It's only when we get a rap that we suddenly wake up and say, "Hey, what the hell's happening?" And I'll be honest with you, the pandemic is actually one such classic case where it's the first time, I think, in the history of civilization that the world has actually come to a stop, right? And all the economic chains have just completely stopped. And what did we see? We saw blue skies, all right? It took just about 3 weeks for foxes, deer, peacocks to come into urban areas without being invited, right? They didn't have to be invited, they walked in. So what does it show? It shows, you take Chernobyl, right? You go to Chernobyl now, and excepting for man, everything else is living out there now. All right, it's supposed to be hazardous. So coming to the point that, we must take action, but it seems the action has to be by shock. And he's right, $250 billion for Saudi is nothing. But what we do, which I must say that the government of India and Narendra Modi ji and the current dispensation, including industry, is thinking of green energy, blue energy, etc. We got to stop crude. We've just got to stop crude. That's it. Once you stop crude, the whole damn cycle reverses. It just reverses. Yes, Ram.
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating to have a look at the whole at the subject, the architecture of climate change. But I'd also like to remind you a few incidents I read in recent newspapers, which really worried me for a few days. It was in a newspaper that I read that, I think it was a cheetah or, it could be a tiger of a kind, which
That
put
was a
its
cheetah,
head
a
in a,
leopard.
sorry, it was a
A
leopard,
leopard.
yes. It was a leopard which was trying to drink water from a pot and got stuck in that, it got its head stuck in that pot. Don't you think it's a shame on mankind to bring this animal to such an such a pass? All right. So I mean, it's really pathetic. That means if the water reserves are not protected, okay, I think it's a cause of concern and it's a shame for mankind. And in India, let's look at some of the areas in which very tangible contribution can be made to preserve nature. One of them is you have to control mining. Mining is of all kinds. Today, if you look at the construction technology in India, okay, I mean it's really primitive in the sense that even today you know you use a riverbed sand to construct the walls of every building. And when you're trying to mine the sand from riverbeds, what are you doing actually? Okay, I mean, sand is gold. Now, and another subject which I read in the papers recently is to say that there are what are called as sand mafias in India. I mean, this is something which really is within our hands to control. It's a government, it is the judiciary, as well as it's the administration which can control such kind of abuse of nature. I think before going any further, I think we've got to bring about certain norms in society to ensure that within our own we bring climate protection within our means. I think if I do that, I would have really contributed a lot.
Absolutely, Ram. Dr. Ram, what you said is absolutely correct. Let me ask both the panelists for their quick comments to weigh on this. Okay, India has many underdeveloped regions which have leapfrogged technologies. For example, adopting cell phone usage before landline grids had been established. Now, India is obviously predestined to be the major solar power producers and is in fact already exporting solar generated electricity. In fact, yesterday in newspapers, Mukesh Ambani said that India could export $500 billion of clean energy. Now, my request to the panelists would be to reflect upon or let our audience know which energy, according to you, which energy generation and storage technologies you think this country should we focus on. Satya?
Again, I come back to an all of the above strategy. You see, we need what I call reliable renewables. To make the renewables reliable, you need storage systems that are mass scale and convenient. But do they have to be huge? Does one have to reinvent? Because you see, in India, with the population distribution and the development distribution, you can have microgrids. So you see, if you have a microgrid in a village that only serves that village or perhaps a cluster of nearby villages, then you're not relying on a national power grid. You're building a local grid. How do we create value for that? This is where digitalization comes in, because in the digital economy, you can make the value of that generated power into a token. So when that generated power is protected by tokenization, that too becomes a source of resilience, because both the stored energy and the produced energy now gives an economic value and an economic base to these people in previously underdeveloped regions who now have their own power and energy source. And with the token in the digital world, it enables them to trade that energy, to feed it into the grid. And when Mr. Ambani is talking about energy exports, he can't be talking about physical exports of electricity unless you build large grids. I mean, where does
Yeah,
it
of
go?
course.
Are you seriously going to build a grid with Pakistan? You know, I mean, at most, you're going to go into Nepal. So microgrids and energy trading. And if energy trading happens with digital currencies, with tokens, and in the digital world, you see, this is a way. But as to storage systems, you know, I mean, there are many different developments going on. There's a lot of R&D. And again, let's be agnostic about it. Let's look for best practices. And I would say pick the 3 best practices, the most promising technologies, and go forward with those. Actually, one of the papers we're working on, my colleague, Dr. Srikanth Venkataraman, is working on the reliable renewables. And in coming weeks, we'll be producing a paper comparing the efficacy of different types of systems and the new emerging battery technologies.
Kapil, you want to add anything to this?
Yes, definitely. I fully agree with Satya that there's no one single option. It's got to be a mix of things, and they each compete with each other. For example, in technologies, we have different technologies for cell phones, cell phone transmission. We had for VCRs a different pattern of VCRs. So in the same way, they will thrash themselves out, whichever is going to take the lead in terms of technology. But equally important, what I want to state here is that apart from generation, what you rightly said is waste. We should stop the waste and you should stop the use of crude. And here I bring in what I'm passionate about also is drone technology. So I am now talking to the US, etc., to partner in bringing in drone logistics, not just talking about packets, not just talking about a 1 kg, organ or something like that. No, I'm saying very simple that the first pollution that comes in is when you're building the road. So you need concrete, you need cement, or you need bricks,
Bitumen.
or sand, or whatever. So the production of that is polluting. The transport of that is polluting. The laying of that is polluting. The use of that is polluting. But at the same time, let's think that highways are the arteries of an economy in a country, and they have to be used, right? But just like the red corpuscles in our bloodstream, they cleanse, right? The transport system is doing the reverse. It is cancerous, right? And the problem is that if we use them, we have to use them. So if you supplant that with drones, and I know that with computing power and R&D, drones carrying 1 ton, 2 tonners is just a matter of time, very much of time. And just like what you said, Nitin, about the cell phone, how cell phones have replaced landlines, and you don't need copper, and you don't need so much of commodities. And that's another thing which I want to say, that anything that is commoditized will be put back in the ground. And this has been said by none other than the person who formed the OPEC, Sheikh Zaki Yamani, in 1997-98 made a statement, and he said that if oil goes to 100 plus, right? Well, he of course said it's pretty unlikely, but even if it does, he said the Stone Age did not end because of the lack of stones. It ended because of technology, and it was supplanted by technology. The same thing is going to happen here. And I'm saying that drones will each kilometer of a highway that's made cost 10 crores. Each kilometer of highway to maintain is 50,000 rupees per kilometer per year, right? And all of it is polluting. So instead of building highways, stop that, invest in drones, which don't use crude oil, right? And it cuts down the transmission time of anything by 40, 50, 60% or whatever. It cuts down the speed of delivery. Increases the speed of delivery, where the average speed of a truck is today 40, 50 kilometers an hour. The drone will travel at 50, 60, 80, 100 kilometers an hour. So time compression, distance compression, no crude, right? And it goes like the crow flies. It doesn't need a road. So coming back even deeper than that, my father told me when I wanted to drive, He said, Kapil, if you want to drive a car and you want to take it to office, I suggest you take the bus. Don't take a car. So I told him, he's an engineer. So I said, why are you saying this? He said, remember one thing, personal transportation is an extension of your ego. It's your identity, right? And you should use it for your advancement as a human being in the mind. You should use it for your pleasure so that you feel relaxed and you can think. And remember one thing, that the car was developed because the horse had limitations of speed. But the concept of horsepower was transferred from a horse to an engine because you wanted the car to take you everywhere where a horse took you. But the problem is the car only takes you where the road takes you, right? A horse goes wherever it wants to, right? So if you take a drone and make drone mobility, then you can actually literally travel anywhere without crude oil, right? At a cheaper price, right? Of course, whether it's going to be lithium ion or whatever, I don't know, right? That's got another thing. So coming back to this critical issue that we first need to transfer transportation from conventional transportation to drone mobility. And I'd like to say something here, like H.G. Wells visioned, your Clarke, Arthur C. Clarke had a vision, right? And if you go back in time and see movies, science fiction movies, it's a matter of time that it becomes reality. And that fiction to reality with quantum computing is going to take, whatever it took about 10 years, will take about 1 year or maybe 6 months. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Very, very well said. Very, very well said. Kapil, very inspiring, of course. Now, this reminds me that, we as humans, we always forget that in a rat race, when we get caught up in a rat race, ultimately we are reducing ourselves to become rats. Now, in climate-related issues, we are coexisting with nature, and I think this kind of attitude of supremacy on nature and our arrogance to abuse nature, I think is something which is not only an individual trait, but now it's become a community trait. And I think we need to reverse that trend.
Okay, I would now like to turn to the issue of waste, an area where a lot of negative effects could be improved by changing behavior. If we were to manage waste in a way that it avoids landfill through separation and recycling, while reducing consumption by reusing products, we could significantly reduce the impact of waste. The waste that remains would be burned to create energy, meaning less waste or nothing at all is actually sent to landfill. Now, by recycling and zero waste habits take time, although every small individual action matters. We could start by taking small steps like avoiding single-use items and choosing durable materials that can be used numerous times instead, ensuring less waste ends up in landfill. In other words, sustainable waste management includes collation, recycling, and use byproducts. Mr. Satya, please share your insights into these critical aspects and the new technologies to mitigate the hazards caused by waste.
Well, you see, the whole zero waste economy will happen when people understand that you're literally burying money in the ground when you're putting waste into landfills. It's like taking crores of rupees, digging a hole and throwing it in there and covering it up. Why? I mean, we're not talking about the gold coins at Padmanabha temple, which are there forever buried in the chests. We're actually talking about something that can be used and reused and reused. When I was a child in India, we actually had a zero waste economy. Whenever you'd go for tea, you'd get it in a clay cup. You'd throw the clay after you were done, and then it became plastic. And then you had a huge problem. At that time, when I was going to the market with my grandfather, you'd have a jute gunny bag that you'd use every day to carry your things back and forth from the market. Now, whenever you go, you get a single-use plastic bag. You see, India has had a great history of zero waste, of recycling. When you think of the plates that used to be made from the leaves that were held together, that we were eating on banana leaves, and now they're plastic. now they're paper, and you ask why. Why can't India turn back even as it advances as a modern economy, why can't it turn back the clock 50 years to when, in fact, there was much more harmony with nature, there was much more support. So it's not a matter that consumers have to learn new habits. We have to learn the old ways. And in India, you have this whole profession in urban areas of people who actually sort through rubbish heaps and landfills to find recyclable materials. Formalize that, organize that, and bring in the technologies like the ones that turn plastic into fuel, that make biofuels out of other waste, that make biogas out of organic waste. As you say, it's actually, the separation and the recycling and all of that. It's all feasible, but it's not a matter of bringing in a new attitude or a new policy. It's really a matter of India rediscovering the roots of sustainability.
Absolutely. Kapil, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah. Okay. So my views on waste management really is that I have a conundrum out here, and which is that till we have the current plastics and crude oil, etc., I somehow fail to understand that other than landfills, which is happening, which is a feature, which is like sweeping it under the carpet, whether we burn it, incinerate it, or what we do, I'm not too sure as to whether it's genuinely addressing the climate issues, etc., and that we can address it in a genuine sense. We got to actually, stop the kind of consumerism that we have, which is wasteful. Like I told you about my tomato ketchup story, which Satya is like, just give me a minute, which is that when we were kids and we wanted a tomato ketchup, we used to go to the local Modikhana dukan and say, ki, bhaiya, ek bottle tomato sauce dena. And there used to be two brands. One was Kisan and one was Halls. Halls is no longer there. Kisan is still there. Now we have Maggi and Heinz, etc. Now brands have increased, and the SKUs have increased from 200 grams, etc., on to multitude. Second, the variants have increased. So you now have tomato chili and sweet and sour and whatever, right? So now the humble tomato needs so much water to grow, so much oxygen to grow. And then it is taken by people, it is logistically sent to a factory. It is converted into tomato ketchup, which is again polluting, using all kinds of energy, etc., water, more water. Then you package it. So you add new pollutants in packaging, and then it is shipped, again polluting, into a mall. And there are these myriad combinations of packets, etc. And you go there, you want just one tomato ketchup bottle, and you see that, oh, you take one SKU, you get one for free, and you end up getting 2-3 kilos of different kinds of sauces, etc. Come home. They lie in your home for a month, and then suddenly your wife or anyone will take it. So this has become old, dump it.
Right.
Now, what have you actually gone and done? You've taken pure oxygen, fresh water, converted it, polluted the whole goddamn world, and take it and dump it in the oceans, right? Now, what do you say to that? It's consumption. We've got to stop this consumption first. That's the wasteful thing. It's our concept of living. When we were kids, I mean, I've shown both Ram and Nitin, I wear my wedding suit still. And all of us in our families, we had hand-me-downs, all right? And we used to don. And like I say very much, that you can wear a torn pair of Levi's and say it's a designer pair of Levi's, but you can't wear a darn pair of Levi's because it's darned, right? So if a real famous star or someone wears a darn pair of jeans and we say that's fashion, that's how you should consume, why not? Why can't you put a logo on your chest and say that I have bought 10,000 shirts, I have taken one for myself, and 9,999 I have given to people who can't buy a shirt, rather than me buying 10,000 shirts, keeping them, and then saying, oh, I'll wear this today, I'll wear this tomorrow. No. So waste is in our way of living in the first place. We are generating it. And we are using oil, crude oil, for that purpose, for every way. So I think the answer is really to cut this out. Otherwise, I don't see how we can. Yeah, of course, packaging can go to environmental friendly packaging. Like, for example, there is now a soft rock used for making paper. So it's made in Australia and China, etc. I think it's soapstone or something like that. So yeah, there are alternatives. But as of now, immediately, I think it is a concept of living and consuming. Yeah.
Well said, Kapil. It could not have been so simple in any other words. As I said in my introduction, all the stakeholders need to get involved to achieve real progress in confronting climate change. Now, at the last climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, many of the statements and proposals coming from the corporate world were stronger than those from the public sector. That, I think, is an indication and a signal that good corporate citizenship means taking responsibility for the climate, regardless of government regulations. But large multinationals are big ship that needs a lot of time to change course. Now, while smaller companies and especially startups can act like speedboats and pivot swiftly. May I request you to please share your views on the role of larger and smaller enterprises in effecting these changes?
I'm happy to, because I was actually at Glasgow and I was there on Investor Day, among other days. And you see, the corporate community, the global capital, has now come to see climate change as an economic opportunity. In building resilience, in going through energy transition, there's actually significant money to be made. Lots of central banks, to Kapil's point, are divesting from fossil fuels, will no longer fund them.
That's right.
In Glasgow, it was actually identified, it was a bit shocking that the value that's seen in the next decade alone is $50 trillion of wealth can be generated through energy transition and climate shift. So all of the capital is pouring into that. And I mean, the large transnational energy companies, even though it may be greenwashing for the moment, are no longer calling themselves fossil fuel companies. They're calling themselves multi-platform energy companies, which means they're embracing all of the above. So you have traditional fossil fuel producers that are also investing in wind, in solar, in reverse osmosis for desalination, and all of these projects. Starting with the point that energy companies have the best expertise in producing energy, or so they think. At the same time, as we know from India, the strongest entrepreneur is the one who has a great idea and only needs a few thousand rupees to get kickstarted. I mean, the wild success of microcredit, the creation of what used to be formerly a dependent class in India into a small business class, is all because you were able now to access through digital technology, through mobility devices, and with the wider availability of capital, the ideas you need to fund yourself. So these agile businesses, these startups, not just tech startups, but the whole entrepreneurial mentality of wanting to make a difference is going to happen in concert. You're right that the large companies are not easily to turn around. But when capital sees trends, capital flows in the path of least resistance, and it will follow the trends. Right now, the huge trend is decarbonization, and the shift that happened in COP26 was it finally dawned on everyone that yes, this Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is what COP stands for, is actually a useful place to come and compare notes. But whatever the resolve is, when those leaders get back home, their ambitions are tanked by domestic politics. The domestic politics always triumphs. I mean, Modi ji came home from Glasgow saying, we resisted world demands for decarbonization. But the day he landed, he couldn't breathe the air in Delhi itself. So, you start asking yourself that political rhetoric is one thing, the reality of the climate is another thing. And as you said, Nitin, everyone has to come together, citizens, corporates, NGOs, civil society. you have to create the parade that government will follow. What's evident to all of us is that government will never lead on its own. It will follow trends that citizens and movements and capital have begun. So what really emerged out of COP26 at Glasgow, and will probably be reinforced at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is coming up in only 8-9 months from now, is that citizens, civil society, and private sector, private capital are already forming an awkward kind of alliance. That alliance will become more robust because I think that the activists have great ideas, capital needs to fund it, and you can do this despite governments, not because of governments.
Very well said, Satya. Absolutely. I cannot, endorse one single suggestion, but every suggestion needs to be endorsed. Kapil, you want to add to this?
Yes, I fully agree with Satya about the political compulsions and populism, etc. Here, I wish to say that those of us who I would say that we are a little enlightened at this point of time are the ones who have gone up from ground level up into the stratosphere, look down on this planet, and all we can see is a fog. All right. We have now created our own cocoon of pollution and polluting ourselves to extinction. Right. And what's important is that when about 5 years ago, I brought in air filters with ionizers, etc. And every evening, I actually shut my doors and windows, put on my ACs, I put on the ionizers, and I walk inside my home, right? And my friends started laughing at me and started saying, Kapil, what's wrong with you? I said, there's nothing wrong with me, there's something wrong with you. So they said, what do you mean? I said, okay, if you think I'm stupid, why don't you go to the tap, put your glass under it, and drink water from the tap? I'm talking about here in India, not New York. Yeah. All right. Are you mad? We can't drink that water. I said, precisely. So I can't breathe this air, right? You can afford to. I can't. I'm a heart patient. All right. So I know what is impacting me. Now, when you come to the condition as I am right now, where you're also weakened physically, then you will realize what I'm doing. Okay. I've got the parameters. I can check with my parameters and see what's happening. Right. And I also relate the story back to myself, 1969. I was in Calcutta opposite New Empire, and there used to be this restaurant called Friend's Home, and next to this Friend's Home was a chemist, and I'd gone there to buy with my father to buy glycodin, right? And when I'm talking to you, I can actually visualize, because it was a very defining moment for me out there. In walked in this 4 or 5 German tourists. And they asked the chemist, they said, we'd like to get some water. So I was wondering, I said, Friend's Home is just next door. The restaurant is there, the water is there. Why the hell have they come to a chemist store to get water? Now, to my surprise, I found the chemist went back, opened the fridge, and took out a bottle, a brown bottle. And before I could even think or see, he said, 9 rupees. I jumped out of my skin. I said, 1969, 9 rupees. This guy, he's a crook. And these guys are fools. They're buying free water for 9 rupees. Now, while I was thinking that, I looked at the bottle. I said, he's asking for water. Why is he giving Golden Eagle beer, right? Then I found that the beer, where beer was written, there was a white strip on it saying mineral water. Okay. And I still thought, I said, these Germans are buying water, mineral water. What is now? School was in Shimla. So we used to cross Solent. And after a couple of years, I discovered that Mohan Mekin's brewery had their own spring water with which they used to make their beer. And they used to also fill water in these bottles as mineral water for foreign tourists, right? And it was sold. I can still remember, why are we paying for water? Now we are paying for water. Now the 1969 is, when are we going to start paying for the air? Right?
Absolutely.
So I'm afraid, I mean, and honestly, if you look, I'm looking out, I've got my sensors and all, which show the pollution levels. It's crazy. It's crazy. So coming back to politics and coming back to people, when we have this pandemic is the first rap on our fingers. All right. And I'll tell you another thing which I now remember is that environmental issues with us started in our school in Shimla and Bishop Cotton School, 1961 when I joined. I was in junior school in Linlithgow, and Mrs. Goss, the matron, she used to make us stand early in the morning and she used to watch, and this is the words: do not waste water while brushing your teeth also. You should see that the bristles are only softened or moistened with water. She said, water is the most precious resource on this planet. Please don't waste it. And if she found anyone wasting it, she'd take a ruler and rap the guy, right? So all these things are actually saying, I think we've got to take it down to the education level and also tell it to the masses that, look, this is not the way. So either you get another rap or you change yourself. Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry if I've taken.
Thank you so much, Kapil. No, gentlemen, this is such a fruitful discussion, and ideally, we could have had one full discussion on each topics
Yes.
as we covered. But it's so unfortunate that normally whenever I attend this kind of seminars, and I always hate the last anchor coming and saying now it's an end. So, and now unfortunately I have to do that ritual of.
Nitin, can I just say a few lines here?
Sure, please.
Yeah. When I was going to Nasik yesterday, I kept noticing buildings, warehouses, dumps, garbage.
Yes.
And the word in my mind came up: wasteland. All right. And I thought of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, and I took out this para from that, and I wish to just recite this one para out here. And it is: what are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats, and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust.
Absolutely. What a closing remark, Kapil. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're
really
welcome.
so much. I know, I have traveled several times from Bombay to Nasik, and this is exactly the feeling I also carry whenever I travel that patch of land. Satya, may I request you for your closing remarks or closing comments?
I really want to say that it's a moment of concentration. I know that many of the people in my circles in India think, climate change, it's something, but we have bad weather all the time in India. What's to worry? The realization has to come that it's not a climate change, it's a climate crisis. So when it comes to water, how do you harvest rainwater and capture it instead of letting it run away? How do you make optimum use of the water resource? Instead of trying to remediate depleted soils, why not move straight to controlled environment agriculture in places that have arsenic poisoning or are otherwise salinized or all of that? So on this all of the above strategy, when one looks at the investment capital present in India itself, when one looks at what can be raised by a global carbon levy and go in for climate resilience, so climate resilience has to come from shift of attitudes, shift of resources, decarbonization on a massive scale, and accelerating the energy transition into a compressed timeline. And if in the process, it takes away the absolute wealth and dominance monopoly of the oil producers in the Middle East and West Asia, that's a bonus to me.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your valuable time and insights. It has been great pleasure talking to you, Satya, also Kapil. I would like to thank the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana Chapter. Let me conclude with a humble prayer to the Almighty to bestow mankind with the right spirit to fight the coronavirus. and I may also add that some sense of care for our mother planet, and help restore peace, prosperity, and well-being. Satya, it has been a great time. I really thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for you joining so early from Canada. Kapil, thank you so much for joining and also helping us put this whole session in place. I must thank Dr. Ramkumar as well for helping us put the sessions in place.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.